talk about death. Let's talk about grief. Let's talk about the afterlife. At some point in our lives, we're all going to have to deal with it. I've dealt with it many times. When I was 5 years old, I could have sworn that my grandmother, who was lying in her coffin, was breathing. I saw her chest moving. So I tried to climb in the coffin with her and lay down beside her. Until my cousin came up and grabbed me and said, "You can't do that. Your grandmother's dead." And I was 5. So I said, "Hey, no. Grandma's breathing." I think that was my first indication that I definitely am an empath. And I, for years, hid that, ran from it, or maybe I was just young and decided to enjoy life and party and not think about it. But then I got into my 20s, started going to college, and I noticed every day, almost every time I was on the highway trying to drive to or from college, there would be a hearse in my rearview mirror, or there would be a hearse in front of me, or the next day there would be one coming down the other lane or beside me in the other lane, and I would just get this chill all over my body. And I would think, what in the world is going on? Why am I seeing all of these hearses? All I know is I get the most dreadful feeling whenever I saw them. And it was often. And then the most tragic thing that can ever happen to a parent happened to me. And I actually sensed something bad was going to happen before it did. My son committed suicide. And strangely enough, the morning he did commit suicide, he was locked in a bathroom. The first thing I saw was a digital clock on the microwave. And I just saw the time, 6:02 a.m. And forever, I could not look at a clock because I was afraid I'd see 6:02 on that clock. It took me months, maybe even years, to be able to adjust to that. But that morning, my other son tried to break through a glass window in the bathroom to get to my son who had committed suicide. And there was another connection. I heard this voice, and it was saying, and it was a voice, but not a voice, but it was saying, "Don't let that son go through that glass window. You've already lost one. You don't want to lose another." And I swear to this day, that was my dead son helping me protect his brother. And that was just the beginning of many instances. That house was so heavy feeling that people would walk in and say they felt like you could just cut it with a knife. The air was so heavy. So I asked a couple of priests to come and do an exorcism. And they even said the entire trip there, they were sweating. And the closer they got to the house, the more their hearts began to just pitter-patter, just beating as hard as they could. And then when they got into the house and they started blessing the house and started to do the exorcism, one of the priests came to the other priest and said, "Did the boy die in the bathroom?" And the other priest said, "Yes, he did. Why?" And that other priest said, "Because I was just in there, and the minute I started to pray, the curtains on the bathroom window started to just blow as if wind was blowing them." But after that exorcism on the house and the blessing of the house, it seemed to be okay. And I noticed there were no more hearses. I wasn't seeing them anymore. So that was just the beginning of my ability, or my knowing of my ability, to see the other side, connect with the other side. And it got to the point that I would actually sense this horrible dread, a sense of depression, and I would feel something really bad was going to happen. And it usually meant somebody was dying or someone I knew did die. And I'd find out a day or two later. And then I'd realize why I woke up at 2 a.m. in the morning thinking, oh goodness, someone's going to die. It's not a happy thing. It's not a happy feeling to have. But it is what it is. So then, a few weeks after my son died, my nephew was murdered. Yeah, murdered. He was beaten to death. And he was put actually on life support at first. And I said a little prayer to my son who had passed a few weeks earlier, and I asked him to take care of his cousin. And again, here comes this voice that wasn't a voice that said, "It's okay. He's all right. I'm taking care of him." And I immediately thought, "Oh boy, he's okay. He's going to live. He's fine." And I immediately called ICU. They put my mother on the phone, and I told her, I said, "Mom, he's going to be okay. Tell my sister, don't pull the plug. He's going to be all right." And she said, and then I told her why. I told her that my son, who had passed, had said, "He's taking care of him. He's taking care of his cousin." And that's when Mom said, "Well, honey, it's the truth. He is taking care of him because he had just died. My nephew had just passed." So my son was letting me know, "I'm taking care of him, Mom. He's right here with me." A few years later, my dad became very ill, and he was in ICU, and he had cancer, and he wasn't going to make it. And he had many battles trying to survive. And one night, they were doing a procedure on him. And during that procedure, the doctor came out and told me that he lost him, or thought he had lost him for a few minutes, but he didn't know how. Dad seemed to pull through. Well, the next day I talked to Dad. He was still in ICU, but he was able to communicate. And he said that he saw a door. And under that door was a light, a bright light. And he said, this voice, he said it was a deep-like voice, told him that if he goes through that door, he can't come back. So Dad chose not to go through the door. But a week later, he did pass anyway. In fact, it was Christmas time. And when he passed, I was actually singing Silent Night to him. And when I got to sleep in heavenly peace, the verse, Dad went. When my mother passed away, it was unexpected. It was, I had taken her to the emergency room for choking, and didn't see a doctor for hours. Finally, late, very late, doctor shows up, says he's very sorry. He was working on a young person who was trying to keep alive, and he didn't get to see Mom earlier. But he said, her blood work looks great. We're going to send her home. He says, I'm just going to give her an antibiotic and let her go home. Antibiotic just in case when she got choked on her meatloaf, in case there was anything that aspirated in her lungs. So we get ready to go home, and they bring me in this doxycycline, and they tell me to give it to her. And I said, well, I can't give her this. She can't take pills anymore. And this nurse, PA, whoever she was, said, well, how do you do it at home? I said, well, crush it up, and I put it in Jell-O. She brings me Jell-O, crushes it up, and says, well, since you know how to do it, you do it. She left the room. I gave my mother a bite of the Jell-O with the crushed medication in it. She immediately started gagging, and I could see those pretty blue eyes of hers begging me for help as she was gagging, and they rolled into the back of her head, and I couldn't save her. And for years, I lived with her as her caregiver and tried everything possible to keep her alive. And that's not the way she wanted to die, and that's not the way I wanted her to die. She wanted to die in her home, in her bed, and that's not what happened. So I came back home, came back to her house in total shock because I didn't have my mother back here with me. A week later, a week to the day, a week to the minute, I get an alert on my phone from the security cam that was in her bedroom. I'd had it in there for years so I could keep an eye on her when I wasn't in that room. And I thought, that's not possible. Nobody's in that room. I mean, nobody's in there to move, so why would it be telling me that there's motion in that room? So I go grab the camera, and I look, and there is an orb, a little white orb, bouncing at the foot of her bed. And this was just the beginning of many occurrences of seeing orbs on that camera, a light, a lamp that had never turned on by itself, a touch lamp actually, never in the years that she owned it. I bought it for her because she had dementia, and I thought, hey, She could just touch it and it'll turn on. She doesn't have to worry about a switch. Never turned on by itself. But after she passed, multiple times the lamp would turn on by itself. I had an angel at the foot of her bed. It was a Christmas angel, and I just left it there. And all of a sudden, it would start flashing. The light on it would just flash. I would talk to it, and it would flash. And when I stopped talking and left the room, it stopped flashing. So many things happen that let me know that when our loved ones die, they're just a fine line away. And if we open our eyes, if we just listen and look and pay attention, we can see that they are nearby. And they do try to communicate with us. So think about these things. And the next time we talk, I think we might talk a little bit more about the afterlife, but we're also going to talk about grief, because there are so many different ways of dealing with grief and death and dying, like I was when I couldn't look at a clock at 6:02 a.m. So until the next time, start thinking of some of the things that you may have noticed, that you may have ignored, and then tell us, if you will, in chat or anywhere else, comments. Just tell us what you've observed. And I look forward to seeing you and hearing from you, and welcome back next time.